He could have gone home. That's what makes this story dangerous. Not that Rome gave him no way out. Rome gave him a door. The crowd could see it. The officials could see it. Everyone in Smyrna could see it. And the door was small, the kind that fits inside a single sentence. Swear by Caesar. Say it. Make the public gesture. Walk away. No speech, no long argument, no theology, just the words, in the open, where the city could hear them. But Polycarp wasn't only an old man trying to survive one terrible day. The church remembered him as 86, Bishop of Smyrna, teacher of Christians, one of the last living links to the generation that had heard the apostles. So when the city put that sentence in front of him, it was asking for more than sound. It was asking him to make his body say what his soul could not. And if he refused, Smyrna wouldn't let the refusal stay private. The whole city would have to watch. To understand why one sentence mattered, you have to understand the city that asked for it. Smyrna sat on the Aegean coast of Roman Asia, with ships in its harbour and roads climbing toward Pagos Hill. Its public spaces weren't neutral. Temples, altars, processions, games, civic honours, they taught the city what loyalty looked like. And Smyrna had been advertising loyalty to Rome for generations. It had an old temple to Roma. In the year 26, under Tiberius, it won the right to host a provincial imperial temple. That wasn't decoration, it was status. It told every rival city in Asia that Smyrna knew where power lived. Public religion in Smyrna wasn't private. It was funded by the elites and performed where neighbours could see who belonged. And behind it all stood a Roman fear, the peace of the gods. Honour them, and the city remains safe. Neglect them, and disaster may follow. Earthquake, famine, plague, defeat, a ruined harbour. That's why a Christian refusal sounded larger than a personal opinion. To many of Polycarp's neighbours, it sounded like a threat against the whole civic order. Christians had no image in a temple, no sacrifice to the gods who guarded the city, no statue they could point to and say, "There, that is our God." So their neighbours called them atheists, not because Christians believed in nothing, but because they refused the gods everyone else could see. Now put Polycarp inside that world. Caesar could be honoured as a ruler. Caesar could collect taxes. Caesar could command armies. But Caesar wasn't Lord the way Christ is Lord. That was the pressure. A pinch of incense could look harmless from the outside. Inside Christian confession, it crossed a line. And Smyrna needed that line crossed in public. Because if the bishop of the Christians would bend, the city would have its sign. But Polycarp wasn't the easiest Christian to make bend. The book of Revelation had already spoken to Smyrna as a suffering church. Pressure, poverty, slander, prison. And then a line that would hang over the city for generations. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. That line wasn't a named prediction about Polycarp, but it was the air Smyrna's Christians breathed. They already knew faithfulness in that city could become public, costly, and final. Polycarp became the visible face of that memory. Irenaeus, who had heard him as a boy, says Polycarp had been instructed by apostles and had known people who had seen the Lord. The tradition especially remembers his connection with the apostle John. Irenaeus could still picture where Polycarp sat, how he moved, how he repeated what he had received. That made Polycarp more than respected. He was a bridge. Jesus to the apostles to Polycarp, Polycarp to the next generation. And that bridge had already been tested. Years before the stadium, another bishop came through Smyrna in chains. Ignatius of Antioch being carried west under guard toward Rome, toward the beasts. When his road reached Smyrna, Polycarp received him. One bishop in chains, one younger bishop receiving him. Two men remembered as standing close to the apostles, speaking quietly while Rome waited outside the door. Later, from further down the road, Ignatius wrote back to Polycarp as a pastor to a pastor. Stand firm. Be like an anvil under the hammer. Polycarp remembered. Decades later, in Rome, Irenaeus says the teacher Marcion approached Polycarp and asked if Polycarp recognized him. Marcion was teaching a severed faith, a Jesus cut loose from Israel's scriptures, a gospel pulled away from the God who made the world. Polycarp didn't answer like a diplomat. Tradition says his reply was, "I recognize you, the firstborn of Satan." That's the man Smyrna finally brought into public view. Not just an elderly Christian, not just a local bishop, a man who had received the faith, guarded it under pressure, and handed it on. So if Polycarp broke, the sound would travel both ways. Backward, toward the memory he had received. Forward, toward the Christians who would learn from what he did next. By the time Polycarp's case reached the open air, Smyrna was already charged with festival energy. Crowds had gathered for the games, officials expected order, the city expected its gods to be honored. Then Christian refusal walked into the arena of public fear. The crowd had names for Polycarp: the teacher of Asia, the father of the Christians, the destroyer of their gods. That's how accusation becomes duty. If the gods protect the city, then the man who dishonors them isn't merely wrong, he's dangerous. First came angry voices, then chants, then demands. Away with the atheists! Let Polycarp be brought! The crowd couldn't legally sentence him. That matters. This wasn't a random killing in an alley. The proconsul of Asia, Statius Quadratus, held the authority that mattered. The exact year is still debated, commonly around 155 or 156. But law doesn't happen in clean air. A Roman judge could hear the crowd. He could feel the city watching. He could see that this was no longer only a question about one old man. The city wanted a public answer. And before Polycarp stood before the chair that could condemn him, there was still one private question left. Would he take the quiet way out? The account says Polycarp had withdrawn to the countryside. He was found after interrogation led officials to his hiding place. When the arrest party arrived, he did something that turned the whole scene inside out. He didn't run. He asked that food be set before the men who'd come to seize him. Then he prayed. For 2 hours. Long enough that some of the arresting men started to wonder what kind of old man they'd been ordered to take. Then the chain of custody tightened. Herodes, the Ironarch, stands in the story as the bridge between local enforcement and provincial judgment. He wasn't the final judge, but he helped move Polycarp from search to custody to the official hearing. On the way, Polycarp received the practical version of the offer. Why not swear by Caesar? Why not say the words? Why not save yourself? It wasn't a complicated request. That was the point. Do the ritual. End the problem. Let Smyrna see what it needs to see. But Polycarp refused. Calmly, plainly, again. Every refusal made the road narrower. The private door closed. Now only the public test remained. The hearing came down to one repeated mercy. Recant and live. That's easy to miss. Roman authority didn't need Polycarp dead first. It needed him corrected. It needed public order restored. It needed the Christian bishop to prove that Caesar's world still held. Statius Quadratus pressed him. Have respect for your age. Swear by the genius of Caesar. Curse Christ. Simple words. Devastating words. No long theological debate. No need to answer every rumor about Christians. One public act would do. Say it and live. Then Polycarp gave the answer the church would never let die. 86 years I have served him, and he has done me no wrong. How then can I blaspheme my king who saved me? The proconsul threatened beasts. Polycarp didn't move. The proconsul threatened fire. Polycarp still didn't move. And in that moment, the story turned. Rome wanted apostasy. Polycarp gave them confession. So the question changed. If the state couldn't make him deny Christ, could it at least control the meaning of his death? The stadium was where law, crowd, and spectacle locked together. It wasn't only a place to die, it was a stage where Roman order performed itself. The people wanted Polycarp thrown to the beasts, but the beast hunts had already ended, and Philip of Tralles, the Asiarch connected to the festival world, refused to reopen that part of the programme. Even in fury, procedure mattered. The city is angry, the bishop is condemned, and still the machinery has rules. So the demand shifts. Fire. People gather wood from workshops and bathhouses. The Martyrdom of Polycarp says some members of the Jewish community were especially zealous in this, even though it was the Sabbath. That detail has to be carried carefully. Smyrna's Jewish community lived under its own pressures. Judaism had recognized antiquity and a legal place in the empire. Christians were increasingly being seen as a separate movement that didn't fit under that protection. Local tensions were real. But the story can't be flattened into blame against a whole people. Everyone in Smyrna is being pulled by pressure. Rome wants visible loyalty. The pagan crowd wants the gods honored. Officials want order. Some in the synagogue don't want Christians confused with them. And in the middle of all that stands Polycarp, the old bishop who could still end everything with one sentence. But he won't give the city the words. So Smyrna lights the fire. Before the fire is lit, Polycarp prays. The account preserves the prayer with care. He blesses God, he gives thanks for being counted among the martyrs, he offers himself as a witness, not a man chasing death, but one brought to the hour who will not deny his king. Then the story slows down. The fire rises. The martyrdom says the flames didn't consume him at once. They formed an arch around him, like a sail filled with wind. The witnesses say his body looked not like burning flesh, but like bread baking, or gold and silver refined in a furnace. Those images mattered to the early church. Bread, offering, refining, witness. Modern readers have to hear the source carefully. The miracle elements belong to the Christian memory of the event. They aren't the same kind of evidence as the public refusal, the named officials, or the legal sequence. But they aren't decoration either. They show how the Church understood the death. The fire could kill Polycarp. It could not own what his burning meant. When the flames didn't finish him, an executioner was ordered to use a blade. The account says blood poured out and quenched the fire, and that a sweet fragrance rose like incense. Some manuscripts also mention a dove rising from the wound. Many scholars treat that detail cautiously as textually uncertain, possibly a later addition. But the central memory is plain. Polycarp prayed. Polycarp refused. Polycarp died. And the Christians in Smyrna believed heaven had marked his witness. The execution was over. The struggle for the story was not. After Polycarp died, the question changed again. Not will he swear, but who gets to say what this death means? The Christians wanted to gather his remains and honor him. Others resisted, afraid the followers of Jesus would abandon the crucified one and worship the martyr instead. So the church in Smyrna drew the boundary clearly. Christ is worshipped. The martyrs are loved. That distinction matters. The letter honors Polycarp without confusing the witness with the Lord he served. Then the church did the thing that made the memory travel. They wrote it down. The church in Smyrna sent the account to Philomelium and to the churches beyond. The story moved along roads and harbours, through messengers, readings, and copies. Smyrna had made everyone watch. The church made sure they would remember. Return to the sentence. Swear by Caesar. It was small. That was the danger. Rome didn't need Polycarp's whole heart. It needed a visible sign, a public act that told the city its order still stood. But Polycarp's life had been built around another kind of public sign. A bishop receives the faith. He guards it. He hands it on. He remembers suffering Smyrna. He receives Ignatius in chains. He refuses Marcion's severed gospel. He teaches what he heard from those before him. And when the city finally asked him to separate survival from confession, he wouldn't divide what he'd spent his life keeping whole. That's why the story lasted. Not because an old man died. Rome killed many people. The story lasted because the church saw a whole chain of memory placed under pressure. And the chain did not break. Here's what should unsettle us. Rome never asked for Polycarp's soul. It asked for one sentence. A pinch of incense, a few safe words, and he could have walked home. The pressure that kills faith rarely comes as a grand renunciation. It comes as something small enough to feel reasonable. Just say it. Just don't make a scene. But Polycarp knew the small public sign was never small. What you'll perform in front of the city is what you really believe. So his question isn't whether we'd die for Christ. It's quieter. It's what we'd say to be left alone. The harbour wind returns at dusk. The smoke thins above the stadium, the stone streets empty. Somewhere in Smyrna, an oil lamp burns beside a writing desk, and a scribe begins to copy a letter. The city goes back to itself. The story doesn't. It travels.